There's now talk about a temporary increase in the debt ceiling. What do you think about that?
No. I am a no on that.
Yeah.
I think that, listen, the reality is Joe Biden and Senate Democrats haven't done their homework. If they don't want to work, if they don't want to look at spending, then they need to accept the House Republican position and have a common sense approach to raising the debt ceiling. Anything else is sophomoric, it is comical, and not in the interest of the American people.
Well, he's not wrong with that. That's Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, who says, no, he is, and just in case there's any confusion, he is a hard no on increasing the debt ceiling, which it's still a fight. And I'm so confused by a lot of these headlines that I've been seeing. Welcome back to the program. Like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about this debt ceiling stuff. You can listen to the conversation coast to coast on a radio station near you, or watch the simulcast of Channel 347 DirecTV. The simulcast also available YouTube and Facebook as well. Some of these headlines, because the way that government always positions it, like for instance, a tax cut is somehow costly for the government. And it's really like conditioning. It's like brainwashing, the way that they talk about this. So, I mean, it must be nice to be Grover Norquist and have your own theme song from the Beatles, because Grover Norquist, as you know, is the president of Americans for Tax Reform. And he is he's the tax man, and he joins us now. Grover, always good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Dana, good to be with you. Anti-tax man.
Anti-tax man. Yes. Thank you. We're going to have to modify that song and just hope that no one catches it and messages us about it. So, Grover, I was looking. So there's two headlines in particular that I get so frustrated, and I wanted you to clarify some of this. So we have The Hill, who they were talking about plunging tax receipts and raising fears about the debt ceiling because they're trying to figure out, revenue and tax cuts and the tax credits and everything else. And there was this weird piece that is over. I'm going to pull this up. There's this weird piece at the Wall Street Journal, which is blaming Republicans for voting to raise taxes when it's been Republicans that have been trying to push back against big corn, most Republicans, I should say, big corn and green subsidies. Explain this to me, because they're getting so much heat from this Wall Street Journal piece and Roll Call and others.
Okay, well, Rubin, who wrote the piece, actually did an okay piece. If you read the article, it's fairly correct. The headline is incorrect. It suggests Republicans are at peace with tax increases. The Republican Party and Speaker of the House, McCarthy, went to a lot of work to make sure that even though they were repealing a series of green tax credits, which means they were getting rid of tax cuts, which is a tax increase. So that just had to be offset with other tax reductions. It's okay to get rid of tax credits. And they did. One of the ways they did it was they added, let's repeal the 80,000 new IRS agents, because they were supposed to go out and steal somewhere between $200 and $400 billion. And if we don't hire them, then they won't steal that much money, and that's a tax cut. And the other part is some of those green tax credits are refundable. A refundable tax cut is spending. It's just spending through the tax code. They write you a check. They don't cut your taxes. They write you a check. And some of them were transferable. So you can take your tax credit, which you thought was tax reduction, and sell it to somebody. It's cash. It's cash. And that's the point that the head of Ways and Means, Smith, pointed out, says, we're looking into this to make sure that we don't count spending as taxes. And he wrote a letter to the Speaker. And Speaker McCarthy wrote a letter back. This is the key thing. He said, we rate this, as we look at it, as revenue neutral now. But if somebody wants to come in and say that there's some change in the dynamics or how you score things, we will make sure that any final bill we present to the president is revenue neutral, that it's not a tax increase. That is not happening on Republican watch. As McCarthy said, we're Republicans. We don't do tax increases. Since 1994, when 96% of Americans signed Republicans in Congress signed the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, the Republicans have never allowed a tax increase through if they had control of the House or the Senate, okay? And for half of the time, they've had both. The only tax increases in the United States of America at the national level since 1990 were when the Democrats have the House and the Senate, and then they get thrown out of office.
Yeah, well, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, people don't forget. I think people are still shell shocked from Read My Lips. No new taxes. I think they still are. We're talking with our friend Grover Norquist, who is the president and founder of Americans for Tax Reform, because couldn't they have? And I'm trying to cover all my bases and ask any questions that I think that
Sure.
our audience would want to know. I mean, couldn't they just have added that nuance, added that caveat, like, no, we're not going to be selling these off. We're not going to allow for this. We're not going to have this as being transferable. I mean, I just feel that there's so much that they could have done with this, because I was shocked to see not just the Wall Street Journal piece, but also there's this thing from Nancy Mace, which really shocked me, because I don't know why Republicans like Nancy Mace. It seems like it's promoting social engineering through the tax code. That's what it seems like with the green tax credits and that. Couldn't they have just like modified that in a way?
Well, first of all, Republicans didn't have any control over that bill. The way it was passed, the people who agreed to vote for it were so anxious to do something on infrastructure, which is just another word for government spending. I don't know why people melt when you call government spending infrastructure.
True.
As if that's what it was. And I'm sorry, but railroads to nowhere are not infrastructure, and things that people don't use are not infrastructure. One, we should end all corporate subsidies and corporate welfare, and the government taxing certain industries and subsidizing other industries. What do they tax? They tax real industries that provide real energy, and they subsidize energy made out of fairy dust or whatever it is this week, and things that actually don't produce enough energy, so you have to subsidize them. If it was real energy, you don't subsidize nuclear.
Yeah, the EV market wouldn't
be
be without government propping it up with cronyism. Ultimately, I mean, there's no way that you would have as many people using it as you do with this. And I know that some of this was I hate the name of this bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. I use air quotes dramatically, but this, I mean, you could theoretically remove. I mean, this is the funding mechanism for it. I mean, you could stranglehold those objectives in that bill by saying, nah, you know what, we're going to defund the IRS until we get some things straightened out. I would like to defund it altogether, but that's a whole other story. But we're going to defund this. We're going to do these things because that could be offset. So that way we wouldn't have to worry about calling like a removal of some of these credits, et cetera. We wouldn't have to worry about that being looked at as like revenue coming into the government. We could offset this by cutting costs elsewhere, like that. I mean, it sounds big, but ultimately I think McCarthy could have done that.
Well, what McCarthy had to do was get 218 votes with only 4 or 5 people being able to vote no on the Republican side. So you had Republicans in the Northeast, which wanted to revisit the SALT deduction, which is allowing state, local governments New York City.
It's one deduction Democrats love.
The Democrats love that tax cut for rich people because it's rich people in blue states being taxed to death, and it reduces the damage that the mayor of New York and the governor of New York are doing to their own people. And when somebody says, oh, SALT is awful, the answer is you can solve this problem by electing a different mayor and a different governor. You can solve it yourself, New York. You don't need to change federal law to solve this problem.
Yeah, true. Well, that's the one that they didn't need to do anything. We're talking with our friend Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, about the debt ceiling thing, because we were talking about big corn and the green subsidies, because I cannot stand the cronyism, and I cannot stand propping up markets that would not ever perform as well naturally without that government involvement. And I just kept going back to the fact that they were trying to define these removal of these, propping this up, these subsidies essentially, as increasing revenue, and then trying to spear all of, I think, every Republican out there as, oh, well, they're for tax, therefore increasing taxes. That's what Republicans are doing. Are all tax credits equal? Explain that for us.
Okay. Some tax credits, the part that if you owe it $1,000 and you have a $1,000 tax credit, then you pay nothing. That's a tax credit that reduces your tax burden. If you don't have a job and you have no taxable income and you get a tax credit for $1,000, that's a check to you for $1,000. That's spending. If you go to a company and say, there's a tax cut, but by the way, if you don't have any income, you can sell it to somebody else.
Right.
that's spending. It's pretty easy to divide out. It's just that the government kind of has hid those numbers and not made it very clear. What I think the Republicans, McCarthy and the Ways and Means Chairman Smith did a very good job of doing was saying we separate out the part that's spending, we separate the part that would actually raise tax revenue by getting rid of the credits, and then we offset that with other tax cuts. And they said, and if by any way we missed on this by a penny one way or the other, it will be fixed. It will not see the light of day if it looks like a tax increase. And that was the Republican Party and Speaker McCarthy and the entire Republican caucus saying, we are still the Republicans that will not raise your taxes. We may invade small countries we can't pronounce, but we will not raise your taxes. And that's a pretty good start when you're going into an election.
Yeah, it is. The green tax credits, New York Post said that that are in the Inflation Reduction Act. And of course, this gets into the funding mechanism as we were talking about. It's being estimated to be in $1.2 trillion as a cost to taxpayers.
When they passed it, it was a very small number. And this is why we worry about Joint Tax Committee and this Congressional Budget Office. It almost looks like a political misstatement rather than an economic one. They put out these credits and they said, oh, we were surprised at how many people would take free money. Well, I don't know why they were surprised by that, but to pass it, they made it look inexpensive and quote unquote lost revenue to the government. And then when we wanted to get rid of it, they came back and said, no, it's $1 trillion. Come on, guys.
Yeah, how do you take the CBO seriously? Because I mean, they're sitting here, they're giving you the standard of, okay, well, here's how much this is going to be in this bill, and then it's actually like 1 trillion times more than what the CBO estimates it at being.
One of the casualties of COVID was the power of the teachers' unions. One of the casualties of this debate over debt ceiling and the green credits is the credibility of the CBO and joint tax. This will help us in the future get better numbers out of the government because we will make them eat the pages that they wrote this stuff on and get different people in there who don't make these kind of mistakes that look like they were politically done.
Last quick question. This is never going to make it to Biden, is it? What McCarthy's promoting?
Written, no, the whole thing. But what we will get from Biden is Biden wants more than 1.5 trillion in debt ceiling because he wants to not have to revisit the debt ceiling until after the next election. Okay, that's what he wants to buy. He wants to buy peace between now and then so he can take naps. Now, if he wants that, we can say we need more spending restraint. Now, we may not get it out of the tax credits. We may get it out of other spending, but there will be more spending cut than debt ceiling increase. That is the deal we got at Obama, and we will do at least that well with Biden. And you just saw the Republican House hold together on. I mean,
I think that shocked them. I think that shocked them because he didn't. I mean, he only won Speaker by a couple of votes. I think him herding the cats altogether really shocked them.
Yeah. Biden thought that would never happen. He thought he could sit there and hold his hands and say nothing. And now he's got to actually do some homework.
Yeah, he's got to actually negotiate. Unfortunately, I think he's already called a lid. I think he's probably already in Delaware. Who knows? Grover Norquist with Americans for Tax Reform. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Dana, thank you.